Say a big welcome to everyone and thank you for being here, and especially a warm welcome and thank you to our guest speaker today, who is Dina Rosen, calling in from Northern California. So a big thank you to Dina for coming and agreeing to talk to us today. Dina is going to probably tell you more about her than I can, but I'll do a quick intro and then I'll hand it over. So Dina is a design and behavioral design consultant. She's passionate about using design to solve some of our planet's biggest problems. As the head of design at O-Power, Dina created products that nudged people to use less energy with a big impact. And over 50 million homes, O-Power saved 20 billion kilowatt hours of energy, which worked out as $2 billion. She's currently working with nonprofits and startups to apply best practices in behavioral design and user experience to environmental and social justice causes. And in her past life, Dina spent 15 years designing user experiences across multiple industries, from consumer electronics to organic food. In her past life, she was a software engineer designing interactive software like CD-ROMs, gosh, that was a long time ago, and global enterprise systems. Very, very excited to have Dina with us today, who's going to talk a bit about behavioral design in general, some examples about climate behavioral interventions, and talking also about some of the tools in the behavioral design process. So as I say, thanks very much, Dina, for being here, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Liam. Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to meet all of you, and I'm excited to chat with you today. So first, I'm going to share my screen. And so today I'll be walking through a deck. I encourage you, if you have questions during the talk, to add them into the chat. I'll get to them as I read them. I also have built in breaks during the talk for us to just ask and answer some questions. So would love any thoughts or questions you have in the chat. I'll also be asking questions of you every once in a while, and you can just answer via the chat window. That would be great. So I'm going to talk to you today about behavioral design, and specifically how it can relate to climate change. So it's how to use tools of persuasion for climate good. And first, a little bit about me and my background. So my background is in human-centered design, and I worked for many years at a company called O-Power, which I will talk about a little bit later on. But this is where I really learned about behavioral science and behavioral design. And now for the past few years, I've been using those tools and working in the climate change and climate equity space. And today, first I'm going to give you a quick introduction to behavioral design. Then we will learn what's been proven to work for climate behavior. So I'll go through some sample research studies. And lastly, I will go through some practical ways to incorporate into your design process if you are designing products or experiences or services. So to get started, we're going to look at the science, behavioral science. Behavioral science is the body of knowledge about how people really behave and why they behave that way. You may recognize some of the books on this page. Behavioral science has become a lot more accessible in the past few years, with a lot of scientists and academics coming out with books with Thinking Fast and Slow winning the Nobel Prize. And what behavioral science and behavioral economics is based on is a behavioral view of the world versus the standard economic view of the world. So the standard economic view of the world, this is traditional economics, says that the whole market and system runs as if we are very rational and self-optimizing people. It assumes that most of our decisions are made very deliberately and that we have enough time and attention to really look through all of the information that we need to make the most objectively correct decisions for us. And that we, will have this deep reservoir of willpower in order to make the right decisions to optimize. The behavioral view of the world is a bit different, and this says that we are swayed by a multitude of non-rational factors. So instead of always doing the optimal thing, sometimes, or most of the times, our decisions are made emotionally and automatically, and that we might not have always the time and attention to really do all of the proper research and understand what the optimal decision might be. So this is, this may ring true to you that yes, this seems more like us. It doesn't mean that we are stupid or irrational people. It just means that we take shortcuts. And this is something that is necessary for our survival. So we have millions of bits of data coming in through our senses at all times. It would be impossible for us to really pay attention to everything that we are receiving. So over our evolution, we've had to develop these shortcuts on how to process things and how to make decisions that will, optimize our survival. And this is something that we all intuitively understand because it's been built into us as humans. So I'm going to go through an example to show what I mean. So this example is an academic study that was about purchasing behavior. So researchers went to a supermarket and they wanted to understand, what kind of messaging would impact people's purchasing behavior. They first set up one scenario of a soup sale. It was a sale on Campbell's soup. They put up signs in the store that there was a sale on soup, and then they measured how many cans of soup people bought. And so when there was a sale on soup, people bought on average 3.5 cans of soup. Then researchers, they set up another condition where it was the same signage, but they added 3 words to the sale sign. And those 3 words were 12 can limit. What do you think happened? Any guesses on if this impacted the purchasing behavior? You can write them in the chat. Exactly. So everyone, all of you instinctively knew that people bought more soup. And it's true. With a 12 can limit, people bought on average 7 cans of soup. So adding this limit increased the number of cans purchased. And if you think about it, in a rational view of the world, if you're only buying 3 cans of soup, a limit of 12 should have absolutely no impact on you whatsoever because you're only buying 3. A 12 can limit should have no impact rationally, but yet it did. And why is that? And Pilar already knows one of these answers is anchoring, but there are a lot of behavioral techniques here at play. So yes, exactly, Isabel, the toilet paper shortage. So one is scarcity. This is very powerful. Scarcity signals a good deal for us. This works when, a store will have a final sale going out, a business sign on their window. It makes you want to buy the things in the store more. It works even in relationships. If someone's not available, they may become instantly more attractive to you. But this is something that over time in our evolution, when we see scarcity, to us, it automatically signals a good deal. So the 12 can limit is doing that. Also, there's anchoring. So if you are setting this norm that people are buying so many cans of soup that we have to limit them to 12, it's telling you, hey, it's actually normal to buy way more cans of soup. and that's anchoring the social norm for you. And then this is overall an example of choice architecture. And choice architecture is when you are framing a decision in a way that it's influencing what people may decide. So I'll give you one more example of this, and this is O-Power, the company that I worked at. This is the O-Power origin story. And so this is an example of how behavioral science can be used to change energy behavior. So not just getting you to buy more soup, but how could you use this to get people to use less energy? So researchers, one in particular, Bob Cialdini, he wanted to know how could we get people to use less energy? So the first thing he did was him and his team of grad school researchers, they chose a neighborhood in California. They called people in that neighborhood and they asked them, they said, why is it important to save energy? And 3 reasons came up most. So first, people said, it's important to save energy so I can save money on my bill. A second theme was around saving the planet. So it's good to use less energy because it's better overall for the planet to just use less. And the third theme was around community. So if you are using less energy, then overall in your neighborhood, you will have less brownouts and blackouts. It's conserving for the good of the community. So what their research team did then was they wrote out these messages on door hangers, and they went all over the neighborhood and they hung these messages on people's doors. And then they went back over time and went to the outside of their houses and read their electricity meters. And so that's how they measured, if these messages had impact on people's energy use. So which one of these do you think had the most impact? Any guesses in the chat? And so it seems like most people think saving money, some good citizen. There's all good guesses. And for those of you who have heard the O-Power story before, you know that actually it's a trick question. None of these messages ended up having any impact whatsoever. And this was something that the scientists actually had a hunch about, and they had actually added a 4th message, which was you are using more energy than your neighbors or less energy than your neighbors. And this message caused a 6% reduction in energy use. So why is that? Why did a comparison to your neighbors motivate people to use less energy? Any ideas in the chat? Exactly. Peer pressure. So we call this in behavioral science, we call it social proof. And social proof is a really powerful motivator of behavioral change. Yes, Anna, or Anna, I'm sorry, I don't know quite how to pronounce. But yes, we tend to do the same as others. So when we know what others are doing, especially people who we believe are like us, it will give us a signal that that's how we should behave as well. And so what O-Power did, they knew the results of this study. They could not go around to everyone's home in the US, put door hangers on the door and read the electricity meters, but they found out a way to operationalize giving the same sort of information on a large scale. So O-Power works with utility companies in order to send these messages out to people in the mail. Here's an example of what this looks like. And it's basically, taking this academic example as a prototype and then building that out into a real product. And here's an example of a real report. So this is my friend's report that she receives in California, and I've blacked out her personal information, but this is hanging on her fridge. And we find that, you know, a lot of people that receive these reports, because they are a physical piece of paper, you're able to share them with you know, the other people in your house, or hang them on your fridge, and it makes them a little bit more sticky. Lori, that's great. You always get a smiley face. Great job. Yes, and it does make you more competitive. So the results of this, and this has been going on for over a decade, we've been sending out these energy reports. So far, the latest that I've checked is that giving people this type of information has saved 25 million kilowatt hours of electricity. The way we know that is because when we send these reports out through utility companies, we are doing a randomized control trial. So we send 100,000 reports out to people, and then we're measuring them versus 100,000 people who do not receive the reports. We do this for a period of time and measure the results before we roll out to the whole population. So saving 25 million kilowatt hours of electricity, and that number is not quite meaningful to most people, but this equals the emissions avoided by planting 290 million seedlings that had been growing for 10 years. So what does this tell us? It tells us a couple of things. One is that small changes applied on a large scale can be incredibly powerful. So each of these homes that's receiving these reports, they're just saving a tiny bit of energy. It only adds up because this program has been rolled out on a very large scale. But more important thing to take away from this is that if we can understand what actually influences us and motivates us to change behavior, then we can design for that. And that is what behavioral design is. It is using this knowledge of behavioral science in the design of products and experiences to influence outcomes. And now, when I talk about behavioral design and these persuasion tools, a lot of people think of advertising because that's typically how we have been presented with these techniques. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So this is an example of a conversation that happened on the Freakonomics podcast. Some of you may be familiar with that podcast. This was a couple years ago. And they interviewed the head of the World Bank at the time. And he had just come out with this report called Mind, Society, and Behavior. You can actually find that online. And this report was how to use these tools of behavioral science to help address different problems in the world. And he talked about this relationship to advertising. And he said, if you were to go to Ogilvy is a major advertising agency. If you were to go to Ogilvy and give them this report, they would kind of laugh because they've been doing this for a very long time. And then in the next podcast, they interviewed the head of Ogilvy. And he said, yes, we have been doing this for decades, but we didn't have a way to talk about it. So that is why there's this shift in the past few years is the behavioral science academics have codified everything. So now all of these techniques that have been used on us just through the advertising industry to get us to consume more are now being used to help us just make better decisions for us and the planet. So this is how I think about things, is that advertising is using behavioral science to nudge the support of brands and consumerism. If you talk about behavioral design for good, it's using the same tools, but instead it's to nudge people, help them make healthier decisions for themselves and the planet. And this has become, a very large field of study. There's plenty of books, websites, groups around behavioral design and behavior change So this has all happened over the past several years. And it's something that's starting to be taught in design schools and business schools. And so it's a really sort of new area and rich area that you could get involved in. Okay, let's do a quick break. Any questions? Maybe I'll take like one question if there's something that someone wants to put in the chat that I haven't yet spoke to.
I had
Go ahead.
I had a question sort of going back to the comparison you made between the standard economic view and the behavioral view earlier. I was wondering if they were necessarily sort of exclusive, I guess, and also if there really was like a true rational or right decision when the world is, I guess, inherently ambiguous and in a certain place. I know that's a slightly broad question, but I'd be curious to know hear your views on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm seeing now in the chat, there's a lot of great questions in here. So maybe we'll get to them at the end. So I think that they are not exclusive in terms of, what is the rational decision. This is a bit of a murky topic. Some people will say like, it's not ethical to nudge people to do anything because who are you to decide what is a better decision for someone or what is a better decision for the planet. You could say maybe it's not great to get people to use less energy. Who are you to decide that? So it's definitely subjective, and you have to think about what does it mean to be a rational decision. I think that is more when you think about something like the soup example. If you only want to buy 3 cans of soup, then rationally a limit of 12 should not impact your purchasing behavior. So that's what I mean there by rational. But in terms of ethical and what's right to do, in my point of view of this is that our world has already been designed in very particular ways, either designed to get us to buy more things or act in a certain way by corporations, or it's been just non-designed in a way that just overwhelms and confuses us and doesn't help us make any decisions that could be best for us. So I feel like if the world has already been designed in a certain way, then it is our responsibility as problem solvers and designers to like take that control back and design for a different set of behaviors. But it's definitely, a topic that you could discuss for a while to figure out, where is the ethical line and how are we using these tools? Like, are we, using them in the right ways?
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so we'll save these other questions in the chat for perhaps later. Okay. So now I'm going to go through examples of some of these climate interventions that have been done before. This right here, this photo is an example of labeling waste bins that has become pretty common, at least here in the US. And you can imagine that just labeling that middle bin landfill might make someone think a little bit more about throwing everything that they have into that bin. So just even, small labels, any moments of getting people to stop and think are key points of behavioral intervention. Okay, so I'm going to go through some studies that have been done. So this study was done in Copenhagen about decreasing littering in cities. So Copenhagen had a big littering problem. Researchers wanted to know how they could decrease that. So what they did was they first gave people, stood in like a public city square, and they gave out candies with wrappers to everyone walking by. And then they measured how many people threw the wrappers on the ground. Then sometime later, they did the same thing, but first they had put these series of green footprints on the street leading to the trash can. So any guesses on the impact of those green footprints? Decrease in littering. Yes, 46% decrease in littering. And so why is this? This is, another example of social proof. It's letting people know that other people are probably also walking towards the trash can. It also removes a barrier of, sometimes people just don't know where the trash can is. So this is helping remove that barrier. But also it's an observable behavior, which makes social proof even more powerful. So if you see other people doing this and walking and throwing out their trash, it reminds you that you are being seen as well. And that if you throw out your trash on the ground, people see you doing that too. So it makes it even more likely that you are going to want to follow this norm and throw out your trash. This study has actually been replicated in several cities in Europe. Okay, installing solar panels. So this was a study done in Connecticut in the US. And what they found was that the biggest predictor of someone installing solar panels has nothing to do with their income or their environmental beliefs, but it is just if there's other solar panels in their neighborhood. So even only one house with solar increased installations in that area by a half. And so this is another example of social proof with observability. When a behavior that you do is observable to others, it amplifies the impact of that behavior. Here's an example of a study that's done in Arizona in the US. So this was hotels that were trying to get people to reuse their towels more. So this would save a lot of water if people didn't need to get their towels washed every night. So first they tested a message like this: help save the environment, help us to save water. And this message had some impact. But then they tried out a different message with some social norming information in it. So, 75% of guests use their towels more than once. This had a 10% larger impact than the environmental message alone. This is an example from the Petrified Forest National Park, which is in the US. So they wanted to stop people from stealing wood from the forest. So they put up this sign. Any guesses on the impact of this sign? Exactly, Lydia. 3 times more wood was stolen. So this is an example of negative social proof, and this is something you want to avoid by telling people that that there's this high rate of theft. It is now setting the norm that that people steal and take from the park. You might not have even thought about doing it, and now that you see the sign, you're more likely to do it. So you just need to be thoughtful about how you're using these types of messages. Eating less meat. So this is something, a lot of climate activists and companies are trying to impact this behavior. So you could say, have a message like this, but that might not be impactful because 25% to you might not seem like a lot. It still seems like the minority. So using, when you have data sets and you want to try and use them to help frame your message in a certain way, you want to be careful about how you use those messages. Here's an example from Switzerland. So Switzerland recently completed this 6-year study where they were trying to understand how they could get people to choose a green energy plan versus the standard energy plan. And so their green energy plan is actually a higher cost than the standard energy plan. And what they did was they tested the default plan that they gave to people. So, some instances, the default was just the standard plan, so people would have to opt in to the green plan. And in other instances, it was switched. So people were automatically defaulted to this green plan and they would have to opt out. What they find was when they switched the default, adoption of the green energy plan moved from 3% all the way up to 80 or 90%, even though it's a higher cost. This is an example of choice architecture. We talked about choice architecture with the soup cans, but this is an example of defaults. So defaults are very powerful. We just tend as humans to accept the default. Anytime you have a product or experience or a system you're designing, you want to make sure that whatever you think might be best for the person or be, the choice that you want them to stay in, you should make that the default. And this has been shown for many things, opting into 401k plans. There's like lots of studies about that, organ donor rates. So defaults are quite powerful. This study was done in England. So this was a study about how do we help people just adopt more sustainable behaviors in general. And what they found was that if you are giving people new behaviors to do, they're most likely to change their habits within 3 months of moving to a new house. And this is called habit discontinuity. And so this is understanding that there are ideal times in your life when you may be more likely to adopt changes. Okay, so let's do one question here before we move on. And let's see, I'm just going to do a time check. 8:35. Okay, so it seems like we are going to we'll have a lot of time also at the end for questions and discussion. Any questions about any of the studies that I just spoke about?
Yeah, Dina, there were a couple of questions in the chat about some of those negative proof examples. And if you had any kind of thoughts on how would be a better way of using social proof in those examples, but without the negative aspect, if possible.
Yes. So stealing wood. Let's talk about that one. So do people understand here why this message could lead to higher theft?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the question is just like one person is no. Okay. So this message is setting a norm saying there is a high rate of theft in the park. So it's telling you it's normal to steal wood. And that makes it more acceptable if you were to steal wood, because you know that so many other people are already doing it. That is why it leads to an increase. You know, I might be someone who, I'm in the park, I'm not even thinking of stealing wood, and now I see this sign and I see, oh, well, all these other people are doing it. Why can't I do it too? Exactly, Mario. Yes. So it could even give you the idea of doing it. So what are some ideas? Like how do you think you could better have a message here that would lead to a decrease in theft? Any ideas in the chat? Yes, I like both of these ideas. So having a fine could be impactful. I like the eyes to show that you're being watched, because it reminds you that, you know, people could see you stealing, someone could see you stealing, that, you know, that I like that. You could have environmental message. You could, let's see, how would you invert it somehow? You could invoke the community. So yes, please protect our park. And talk about how this might affect other people and other guests if you are stealing. Yes, Joshua, no one has stolen from this park in decades. And some of these things you have to think, you know, how comfortable are you with stating falsehoods? So this is, you know, the example of eating less meat. You can't really say join the more than 90% of Americans who are eating less meat if that's not true, unless, you know, you feel okay about stating false data. So other ways to reframe something like this is maybe using the actual number. So maybe it's join more than the X million number of Americans who are eating less meat. Maybe you want to talk more about the increase over time. 300% more people have started to eat less meat. So you could play with the data a bit to make the numbers feel more in the majority or more impactful, and less of a negative social proof example. Okay, I will go. Okay, so now I will talk about how to think about behavioral design in your own work. So this is, you know, I work in mostly software products. So this is a little bit geared towards user, you know, customers or users, but you could really think about this with like any sort of problem you're working on. Maybe it's a campaign, maybe it's a service. So there are three times when I think about, you know, using behavioral design. So the first is whenever you're trying to help somebody pay attention, you're trying to get their attention. Second is when you're trying to help someone make a decision. And the third is when you are trying to help someone follow through with an action. So getting someone's attention. There are a lot of techniques here you can use. You know, we talked about social proof being a good way to get someone's attention. I'll give another example here is loss aversion. So this is another behavioral technique or concept. So we are more motivated by avoiding losing something than acquiring that same gain. So to put it another way, it's more painful for us to lose $1 than it is than the pleasure it gives us to gain $1. So here's an example that we had thought about when we were designing for O-Power. So this was, we wanted to help people switch to electricity rates that would be cheaper for them, but the utility company wasn't allowed to automatically switch them due to regulations. So we just wanted to let people know, like, hey, there might be a better rate for you, and make it the most compelling for them as possible. So you see two ways of framing the same message. And the one below is a little bit more impactful because it's just a little more painful for us to lose money or waste money than it is for us to save that same amount of money. Next, I'll talk about choice architecture, which is, helping someone make a decision. So people's decisions are highly influenced by how the options are presented to them. So there's a slew of examples out there in the academic world around this. Here's an example from a current example from the grocery world. So this is a study that was done around buying plant-based meat. So they found that if you put the plant-based meat in right next to the animal meat, purchases go up like 23%. And this is an example of defaults. So, it's a little bit different than a default choice in a software application or a website. This is like a default choice out in the world. It's putting this meat in a place where you're already at, the default place where you're already going to buy meat, instead of making you go to a new place to purchase that meat. Then lastly, helping someone follow through. So if you want to help someone follow through with an action, there are a couple things you can do that can really make it more likely that they will take that action. So one is commitments and two is plan making. If we commit to a goal, we are more likely to complete that goal. And it's something, it's the reason why people tell you to set intentions. It really does work because when we say we're going to do something, especially if we write it down, it then becomes part of our self-image. And we just want, as humans, to be consistent to our self-image. And so we're more likely to do that. This has been used a lot in political campaigns in the US, all of these commitments and plan-making techniques. So, one thing that was very popular this year in political campaigns is when people did phone banking or canvassing, they would ask you at the end of the conversation, can we count on you to remind 3 friends to vote? And the other thing that can make your commitment even more powerful is plan making. So asking someone to talk through how something is going to be done, it will make us more likely to do that. So you can ask someone, are you going to vote? They can say yes, but then asking them, okay, well, what day are you going to vote? What time? How are you getting to the polling place? Having them think through all of the steps needed to complete that behavior is going to make them more likely to complete it. And lastly, you want to become an expert in the behavior you're asking people to do. So thinking through what are all the action steps this behavior entails, and what are all the barriers at each step and that you want to remove, and what are all the motivators each step that you might want to amplify. So we'll do a behavior breakdown right now. This behavior is something we wanted people to do at O-Power. We had a lot of energy efficiency tips and advice that people could do in their homes. So this was telling people to install a low flow shower head. So you think through, okay, what do people need to do? In order to install low flow shower head, well, you have to buy the shower head and then you have to install it. Okay, so, but you could break these down even more. So what does it take to buy a shower head? You have to know where to buy it. Once you're at the store, you have to know which one to buy. You have to be able to afford it, and you have to remember to do all of this. Once you have it home, you have to remember to install it, and you also have to know how to install it. So every single one of these sub-behaviors are potential barriers. And you can think through, maybe there's many ways we could help remove these barriers. Maybe we give people a coupon to a local store. Maybe we give them reviews so they know which ones to buy. But there's even one more step to this experience flow, which is you have to want to buy the shower head in the first place. And understanding this, this is actually something you have to tackle, this barrier, before any of the others. Because if you don't tackle that one first, they are not even getting to the other steps. So, a common question might be like, is the shower head going to make my showers terrible? So how might you, any ideas in the chat, how might you address that first barrier? Yeah, Liam, I think that is a great idea, testimonials. So if you have other people saying, I've bought this, my showers are great, and I'm saving money, and I'm saving water. Using social proof here would be a great way to tackle this barrier. So this is just like a quick sampler of behavioral techniques. There are dozens of behavioral techniques. There are hundreds of case studies. Yes, free installation would remove that barrier of being able to afford. Also, when you have something free, free itself is actually a more valuable in itself, because people love free things. So even if you're only saving $5, if it's free, it carries more of a value to it. So if you're interested in learning more, there's like lots of great free online resources. What I'm going to do right now, let's see, is I'm going to put a link in the chat. And let's go back. Okay, I just put a link in the chat. This is a link to a list of all of the studies that I just talked about, and also the resources that I just listed. So hopefully that will be helpful if you want to look anything up. And I think that is all I had for today. And so now we have, that's great. We have 10 minutes left. We can have some discussion.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Dina. Really interesting concepts there. And when you go through them, they kind of make sense to, like naturally that makes sense that I would feel like that if that's what I was presented with. But obviously, we don't often think through those things at the time. They're kind of subconscious often, aren't they? So yeah, very, very interesting. So yeah, let's throw out some questions. If people have particular questions they want to speak out, then you can use the raise hand function. But otherwise, let's use the chat if you've got things you want to ask. And I'll just scroll back up and see if there are any in there that we didn't cover yet that might be good to pull out. I noticed one earlier from Greg, who was kind of talking about, and interestingly, we've been talking about maybe having a session on individual versus collective action, and in fact, I think there's a fireside chat on tomorrow which starts to talk about this stuff. But I think most people are probably aware that there's the huge, when it comes to climate change, there's the huge systemic challenges that no matter how many of us take individual actions, we aren't necessarily going to decarbonize the world quick enough by doing those things. And obviously the behavioral design aspect is about helping people make small and incremental decisions. I wonder if, Dina, if you've done any work, or you know anyone who's doing any work on behavioral design and nudging to help people make, I guess, almost more political decisions. So you talked about going to vote and reminding people to make a plan to vote. Is there anything beyond that that's starting to get people to think about how they interact with our fossil fuel dominated society, not just from a personal footprint perspective, but from a collective action perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a great topic for discussion because it's true, like we cannot, as individuals, fix this problem. We need governments and corporations to change policies and to change the systems. And it is not, some of these tools have been used in order to, I think someone, maybe it was Greg who wrote in the chat, to put responsibility on the individual where it does not belong. So recycling is a great example of that. Recycling, that concept was almost invented by corporations to put responsibility on us and to take responsibility off them for creating single-use waste and plastic. So I think, but I believe it's yes, and it's definitely a controversial topic, and some people feel, it's not worth putting any effort into individual responsibility because that is shifting away focus from what's more important. I don't agree with that. I think it's just a yes, and I think we need to focus on changing the larger systems, but also we should be acting more mindfully and responsibly as humans. And I think if people are more starting to act that way, that also sometimes shifts, helps shift policy and beliefs, because, if your customer base is wanting more plant-based meat or wanting more of these sustainable choices, then it becomes good business for them to do the right thing. So I think they work together. And definitely a lot of these tools are being used to help influence people to vote in certain ways. And, I don't know of examples of using these tools to impact individuals who are, making these larger decisions at corporations or in governments. But that would be interesting to think about.
Awesome. Thanks, Dina. I quite like this question from Satawa as well in the chat. And I guess maybe this is just something that comes with experience with some of these things, but how do you decide which behavioral design techniques to use and when? Because you covered quite a few different ones, and I guess sometimes they're complementary, but is it just a matter of trying them out and having a feel for them, or is there kind of a cookbook that people follow?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's more training you can get, and you can go to like behavioral design boot camps or read books to learn. But I think I tried to call out, which could be used for the three areas that how I think about it, like trying to get someone's attention, helping someone make decisions, or helping them follow through. So you could think about it that way, but also, experimentation is definitely great if you're able to do it. It's sometimes quite hard to set up a true experiment in a statistically significant way. But you could just do quick experiments. You could try out and, bring people in, show them things, see how they react. It's a little hard to do traditional user testing with these behavioral concepts because people don't always know, as we see from the O-Power example, people thought they knew what would motivate them to use less energy, and they were wrong. Like, we just are wrong. We don't always understand quite what drives us to act. So you can't always ask someone and take that as face value. But if you show them something, you can look for signs of like an emotional reaction and say, oh, that seemed to have some sort of reaction there. And so maybe this would be the right way to go. But yeah, whenever you can, experimentation is great to do.
Cool, thank you. And then I just found one other question from earlier in the chat from Rohan, which I think might be a good one to end on, depending on the timing. He was asking about how behavioral design links in with the circular economy, and if you had any specific examples of where maybe decision making from a consumer perspective or a design perspective links in with concepts to do with the circular economy.
I haven't done much research on that, but I do know that there are examples of companies making sustainable decisions and having that play out and be validated by the customer base. So one example of that is Etsy. They rolled out carbon neutral shipping, I believe it was last year, and they found that it has been, it seems like it has impacted in a positive way their bottom line.
Right. Cool. So we've got a couple of minutes left. So if anyone wants to throw out any extra questions, or if I missed any in the chat that people want to draw attention to, please shout now or paste them again in the chat. Just with just the last few minutes, we can cover any extra questions.
And Isabel put the All We Can Save podcast rec in there. I second that recommendation. Great podcast.
Yeah, I've listened to it too. It's very good. Oh yeah, Fred did ask this earlier, I think. Is there a decay rate to the effectiveness of these techniques?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we found at O-Power that it would decay if we just sent them a couple reports and then never sent reports again. That effect did decay. So we did keep sending reports over time. But I think it really depends on what the issue is and what the technique is being used and how if you're changing someone's intrinsic habits or if you're extrinsically motivating them. So it has been found that extrinsic motivations like a monetary reward or gamification like badges and things like that, extrinsic motivations are very powerful for one-time behaviors. They're not as powerful for ongoing habits because it is working in this extrinsic way, whereas social proof is more of an intrinsic, you just want to be better or be in the norm. So there is a difference there versus intrinsic and extrinsic, but I don't think there's like one answer of like, there is a 13% decay rate or something like that. I think it would be, for each instance, there may be a particular rate there.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. Brilliant, thanks so much, Dina. And then just one final question to end on, if that's okay with you. Do you have any tips or advice or guidance for any fellows who are really interested in these kind of topics beyond the link that you've shared already? What would you say to someone who looks at your job and thinks that sounds like exactly my kind of thing, I want to do it too? Or anything kind of similar? What would you say to them?
I would say, that's great. We need more people. The resources I put in the link, I would start there because there are some really great free online classes you can take. And then if you want even more, there's great Ideas 42 and Irrational Labs both do boot camps just in behavioral techniques, and they only offer these classes to people using these tools for good purposes, for sort of like mission-based companies or organizations. So I think getting a little bit more, like you can do a lot for free. And then if that is, if it still piques your interest, I would take one of these classes or sessions. And master's PhD program, behavioral economics is what you would study if you want to go into this field. I have not come into this field as an academic, so I am not as well versed in all of that. I'm not a PhD. I've come into it through the product design lens. So I am more interested in how to apply these tools to real world examples and less on the academic theory.
Great stuff. Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Dina, and thanks everyone for being here and asking interesting questions. Yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you again another time.
Bye. Great to meet everyone.
Thank you.